be around the world, and thank you for joining us once again on truth2u.org. That's truth2u.org. It's Season 2 of Torah Pearls. I'm Jono, and joining me in the virtual Truth to You studio all the way from Ireland is Jason of Spiritualbabies.net. G'day, mate.
What's up? Hello, everyone.
Hello. Have you had leprosy lately?
You laugh, but I actually have, my main condition is psoriatic arthritis, which causes really severe psoriasis, not just on my skin, but on my bones and my eyes and in my ears and everywhere. So I, when I read it, well, the first time I read this, I went, oh my God, I'm unclean. But luckily I went through it twice. But I do know a little bit about skin conditions. So this is kind of my, this is my chapter.
Should I be regretting asking you that question?
Yeah, you can feel bad about it tomorrow when you look at it. When you look psoriatic arthritis up online and you go, "Wow, okay."
Right. Well, I sit here and feel bad. Joining us from Indonesia is the author of Let's Get Biblical: Why Doesn't Judaism Accept the Christian Messiah, Volumes 1 and 2. You can get a copy. Well, you can get a copy from his website. You can get it from Amazon. You can get it from all various places. OutreachJudaism.org. OutreachJudaism.org is the website. Tovia, how are you, my friend?
Hey, great to be with you. I'm doing fabulous. Thank you.
Well, that's good. So you don't have leprosy?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, now listen, we're in Tazria, right? Tazria, I got to admit, Jason, I have to say, it's probably not my favorite Torah portion.
You know what? It's quite short and it's quite, it's documentative. It's more like a medical journal than it is something that we should be able to glean anything from. But that said, there's lots of little nuggets in here and it's worth a look.
I'll tell you this, when Tovia and I were talking earlier, he said, we're doing Tazria, right? And I said, yeah, I expect it'll be a pretty quick, a short Torah portion. And he said, no, well, I'll try, but I've got... Now, he used the word juicy. He said, I've got some really juicy stuff in here.
Ew.
Which is not really, it's not exactly... I don't know, Tovia, that I'd use that adjective in relation to this Torah portion, but knock yourself out.
No, this is a fascinating Torah portion. There's parts of this I wouldn't talk about on air. Fascinating stuff that I can go into. Really crazy stuff, but it would be, some of the listeners would be...
It'd be R-rated. It does begin like this. Now, we're in Leviticus chapter 12, people, and it says, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, if a woman has conceived and born a male child, then she shall be unclean 7 days. As in the days of her customary impurity, she shall be unclean. And on the 8th day, and now this is what I've got, and on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. That's fair enough. And then it says, she shall then continue in the blood of her purification 33 days. She shall not touch any hallowed thing, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purification are fulfilled. But, verse 5, if she bears a female child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks, as in her customary impurity, and she shall continue in the blood of her purification 66 days. And the question that everybody asks, Tovia, why is it twice as long for a female as it is for a male?
Well, this is a great question. There are 2 parts to this, to the answer to this question. One is, first, we have to understand what does impurity mean. The impurity, certainly the word conveys something negative, like dirty or pure. We're not dealing here with a physical purity, but a spiritual purity and impurity. What creates a state of impurity? And once we have a sense of how it works, like what is the underlying mechanics, how does this function, then we can have a better idea of what causes impurity. So impurity, tumah, that's the Hebrew word, comes about, it is created through a vacuum. You have something holy, that's holy, and that holiness or life departs. What replaces life is that vacuum, and that creates tumah. And therefore, the greater the loss, or the greater the evacuation of kedusha, the greater amount of contamination will emerge, will be fashioned. Therefore, obviously, the greatest impurity possible is that of a dead corpse, because here you had a living being with the neshama, and the neshama departs the body, the soul departs the body. That creates an enormous spiritual vacuum. In its place, the vacuum produces the tumah. Now we can understand how we can wrap our brain around what's happening here. So in the case, here you have a woman whose body works, a woman who's not pregnant, the body works perfectly. She doesn't need children out of love. She wants to bring children to the world. So in comes a baby in her body, a soul, neshama, is now growing in her body, growing inside of her. An amazing thing. So what happens when that holy child leaves her body? That kedusha, that sanctity, departs her. So what results in this place? It creates a level of tuma. Again, we call it impurity because we don't really have words for these spiritual concepts. So we're just using the words of Torah. This vacuum that's created is of the departure of holiness is what produces the tuma. Now, as we know with a girl is born with every egg she will ever have. A boy actually produces that which produces children. He actually has a factory going on, but a girl doesn't. Every female born is born with every egg that she will ever have.
That's amazing.
It's an amazing thing. So therefore, when a mother gives birth to a girl, it's a double amount of tumah. Why? Because there's now two vacuums created. Not only is the child now departed the body, but that child also has children, is going to be a mother and has everything in her, all the machinery that Hashem created to put in her. So you have this double amount of tumah that is departing her. Therefore, we have twice as long a period of time that she's unclean. It also is it appears very clear that given in verse 3 that we have just juxtaposed. If you notice, first of all, we're told about circumcision earlier on in Torah, but here we are told about the 8th day. We learn out many laws of circumcision from this passage, including the fact that we perform a circumcision on Shabbos, which even makes it into the Christian Bible. We're not going there. But the juxtaposition of placing it precisely here gives us further insight into how this all comes together. When we do something, so usually there's a cost, a risk benefit analysis. But when Hashem does everything, it's perfect. So what happens also is that when a woman gives birth to a boy, so she's tamei for 7 days, which means at the end of those 7 days, she is then able to celebrate at the bris. She's able to go to the circumcision. She's able to celebrate the festivities. So it's not an accident. Look at where the positioning of this verse is. Precise. I mean, it's really completely out of context. And remember, one of the things that I often talk about is when studying Scripture, we're always looking for the anomaly. That's very telling, just like when you're looking at an MRI. We're looking at something abnormal. What's abnormal is the commandment of circumcision already has been mentioned. We have that going back to Genesis. But what's happening here is shoved right in there. Immediately after 7th day, on the 8th day, you can make a circumcision. Another, so they have this double part. So with a birth of a female child, you have actually what is removed is a double holiness. We have the holiness of any child, but for a girl, you're now having a departure of a girl that's now double holy because she herself has all the mechanics that God created in her to produce children.
Already, yeah, that is amazing, Jason.
Well, I have to say, I searched all last week for a reason for the difference between 40 and 80 days, and no one would offer one, so that was really interesting to hear. One thing that I think is worth bringing up is that the unclean status of the mother here, I think sometimes we render all things unclean with the same brush, and this just meant that she wasn't pure to eat the kind of sacrificial meat or to enter the sanctuary. So her day-to-day life would have been fine, but anything that interacted with the priests and the sanctuary, she couldn't be involved with during this period. I think that's worth remembering. I don't want people to, and because especially when we go through the Torah portion, we're going to find that people that are labeled unclean are going to be removed farther and farther away from the people of Israel. But this isn't the mother. She's only unclean or impure for a certain part of her life and the things that she does during her days. also that when she makes atonement, because that's going to come up in the next chapter, um, there's an idea as well when we read through this that it's an atonement for sin. But like we said before, atonement doesn't mean the removal of sin as much as it means kind of getting back on track, and your course is faltered back into the position it should be in. And so your relationship with God is set back to zero. And again, I don't want people to read atonement and think that there's some sort of sinful thing involved in having kids. I know that when I started looking at Torah the first time through, I had all of this misunderstanding kind of planted in my head from what I thought before, and some words that we understand in our faith when we read our Tanakh need to be redefined. And I think that it's a good time to think about what purification means in this instance and what atonement means in this instance.
Yeah, I have to just comment on what Jason says. It's brilliant, and it's something I omitted, and that is not all tumah is created equal, and that's very important. Jason's point. I just want to italicize this. There are. We won't take too much time on this, but there are two levels of impurity that are here that come into view in this passage. The first impurity is the impurity of a nida. That's the menstruous woman. So that impurity is to the level that she can't have marital relations with the husband and so on. After the 7 or after the 14 days is over, so she still has a level of impurity, but it is not the same. It now has receded greatly after she immerses in a mikvah, and then the impurity, as Jason mentioned, then is only restricts her regarding eating sacrificial meats, eating tithes, where you have to be in an absolutely perfect state of purity. So that had to wait until the sacrifices, and we're going to get to that now. We'll talk about the sin offering that she had to bring.
Verse 6, and it says, when the days of her purification are fulfilled, whether for a son or a daughter, she shall bring to the priest a lamb of the first year as a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or turtle dove as a sin offering to the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Then he shall offer it before the Lord and make atonement for her, and she shall be clean from the flow of her blood. This is the law for her who is born a male or a female. And if she is not able to bring a lamb, by the way, if she may bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one as a burnt offering and the other as a sin offering, so the priest shall make atonement for her, and she will be clean. Tovia.
Yeah, so first of all, we have here sort of what's called a carbon oil of yored, which means that different types of sacrifices depending on what you can afford. But that's but I wanted to touch again. I feel like it doesn't even. I'm just commenting on Jason, but Jason pointed out something very significant here. There's clearly an atonement for sin, but this kind of atonement for sin can't be normative sin because we're dealing with childbirth here. But remember what we've talked about many times, and that is whenever there's a carbon chatas or any kind of sacrifice for sin, the sin is not a real sin. It's not real rebellion, but there something had to be very defective about the sin for a sacrifice to be sufficient to atone, because the verse 7 specifically says that her sin is to be atoned for. What sin are we talking about here? What could she have done? Well, our sages tell us that when a woman is giving birth, in fact, as she's approaching her birth, her hormones are changing violently, and during her labor pains, she could have certainly screamed out things and said things that because she would never sleep with her husband again, that she would never want to have children again. Her hormones could change so dramatically, her moods could change. She could have said things out of that state that she really didn't mean. And therefore, during that time, after everything is done, the sin sacrifices would atone for the sins again, unintentional. She didn't really sin in the sense of rebelling against God, but she may have said things or felt things or thought things. That's where the elevation offering comes in. It's really very exquisite. It will take too much time to go into it, but it this weaves brilliantly. What's happening here is we have sacrifices for a woman who, in labor, she's going cursing her husband and saying, "I'll never do this again. I'll never have to have another child again," and so on. And therefore, she brings a sin offering, but it works. Normally a sin offering would never work for cursing your husband, saying, making all kinds of vows. There's no sin offering. But here, of course, she's giving birth. So here we have this mitigating circumstance where it's not an intentional sin. It's really just really beautiful.
It is something, Tovia, that we will never understand. I don't know how. I don't know how. To carry a baby inside you for 9 months and then to give birth to it. I mean, women, they're amazing, and I just don't know how. Don't know how it feels. It's just incredible. Jason,
yes.
have you had breakfast yet this morning?
I have.
You've had breakfast? Okay, I've had dinner. Tovia now wants to get into the juicy things of chapter 13, and I'm not even going to start reading it. I'm going to hand it over. You're going to drive this bus now, Tovia.
Really?
What do you want to bring out of chapter 13?
You want me to take over verse that we have to renegotiate the contract. The contract
it begins like this.
Talk that you're Shakespeare, and then the me with my my Queen's English accent continues as the comment on it. It
begins like this. It says,
the contract, my friends. Go ahead.
It says, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when a man has on the skin of his body a swelling or a scab or a bright spot, and it becomes on the skin of his body like a leprous sore.
Well, what we have to do
singing
first.
This? Are you like singing? Are you like singing leprosy? All right, go ahead.
Leprosy. Yes, Jason.
When we read leprosy in here, it's not leprosy.
What is it? Because when I did, I have actually read through this, and it doesn't really resemble what we know to be what we call leprosy today, at least. What is your investigation?
That's part of the issue is that what we know about leprosy doesn't. First of all, leprosy doesn't reveal itself in the way that this illness reveals itself. It's very different. Leprosy is a rotting of the flesh, and you lose limbs. It's not about tumors on the skin. It's not about your skin changing color or getting these plates and plaques. And also, the leprosy, you can't get leprosy and then be fine in a week. I mean, it just doesn't happen. But that does in the text. But what there is some correlation between some parts of this, especially later on, and elephantitis. So, yeah, I know. Also, there's an interesting thing that we'll find later on where the illness can be carried and affect woven items. So, I mean, there's a part in here later on that mentions fabric, and it's not talking about necessarily stuff that you wear, but also where you live, because obviously these people are intense. And so that's kind of interesting as well. But I don't think at the moment, and especially in the world we live in, I mean, this was a few thousand years ago, and who knows what illnesses were around then. And which brings me on to one other part, which is kind of an interesting one. There are three houses with this. There's a group of people that believe that the laws instigated in this Torah parasha were for hygiene for the people of Israel. There's a group of people that believe this was instigated to show people how to remain holy. And in the third camp, that it's a mixture of the two. I'm in the third camp completely, but it's kind of interesting that you can read them both ways, because that after you, there's no so you get sick and the priest comes and he speaks to you, and the priest gives his clarification on what you need to do. And after that period happens, you're not asked to repent. There's no prayer. You don't get. So that's the argument really for it being a hygiene thing. The priest doesn't come to you and say, right, you're going to have to pray now, and through prayer alone, if God deems you worthy, He'll make you better. That's it's not it's not like in the spiritual thing. You're separated from the people. But then the other argument is, you're separated from the people because you're going to contaminate the people. And I'm sure Toby's going to talk about it, but there's an allusion here to gossip. So that's another thing. But the third camp, which I think is the fairest one, is that this illness, whatever it is, A, was going to be a contamination to the people. B, would contaminate you. I know when I'm poorly and sick, I'm not in the best humor. And my dedication, if you like, to the work that I do during the week and to my creator may be less than favorable because I'm annoyed. I'm like, why have you done this to me? And, look at all these people having a great time, and here I am having a really bad time. And so I do, although this is a physical illness, I think there's definitely a spiritual attack on your body, whether you want it or not. But these things are all important to consider as we go through this. But the most important thing to consider is that when we read about the leper colonies of, say, the Middle Ages, this isn't that. This is something else.
Let me just ask you a question. So this is what we're reading in chapter 13. is a spiritual condition physical on the body.
Yeah, that manifests itself physically.
That manifests itself physically in the body and on the clothing and
even the house.
The walls of the house. Okay, I'm good with that. But we don't see that today. God does not inflict that upon anyone as far as we know today.
Right. Now think of it. We don't. No, it's not. Because, in fact, the Talmud discusses this, and this is discussed extensively. Your point precisely, that, in fact, we are living in such a generation that is so impoverished spiritually that taking someone and sending out a camp wouldn't work. It would actually be very destructive. So, in fact, these kinds of measurements only works where the generation was holy. So then people would take such kind of instruction would make them better people. Now, just one last thing. It's actually famous because missionaries use this. The Talmud says that 40 years before the destruction of the Second Temple, the Beth and Sanhedrin stopped giving out. Many things happened, and that's where the Jesus part comes. It's a chapter in the book, volume 2. But one of the things they stopped doing is there was so much murder. Jews were killing other Jews. Listen to this. This is very interesting. So the Talmud says, the Gemara in Yuma 30, says that there was so much murder going on, Jew was killing another Jew, that the Supreme Courts, the courts that could give capital punishment, actually closed up. That means the main court stepped out of the Temple Mount, and therefore could not give capital punishment for murder. Which is counterintuitive. You would think that, murder is so rampant, we need a stronger judicial system. Now we really have to hike up the capital punishment. No, the purpose of any kind of punishment was to make people better if it would work. But when you have a generation where people are just killing each other rampantly, it isn't going to work anymore. It's not going to make somebody better. So that was the purpose of these punishments. The atheists who say, you have all these things, you stone someone to death.
So that the people would hear and fear. But if they don't care anymore, then what's the point?
And in fact, if you look at the evidentiary level, the level of evidence necessary to convict, it was almost impossible. In order for, a woman committing adultery, so someone would have to be in the hotel room, two people who are not related to either of them and to you, and they're religious, and they have to warn them, and they have to say no, and how would that even happen? So it's interesting. In reality, it's clear. The Talmud says that a court that carried out capital punishment more than one in 70 years was called a Bezdin Katlanus, which means a killer Bezdin. It was something, because the level of evidence necessary was so therefore, why say put to death? Surely put to death. It's not because actually people were put to death. It was very unusual. It was really to tell us the severity, to indicate the severity of the sin. In practice, it was rarely carried out. The purpose is, this is how serious bad speech is. This is how serious. Now we're living in a Dar Yosem, which means an orphan generation spiritually. And therefore, this kind of generation needs, as Led Zeppelin said, a whole lot of love.
The thing that sticks out in my mind, Tovia, yourself as a Cohen, you are required, according to this chapter, you're one of the guys that makes the house calls and examines what appears to be a potentially contagious condition, and that's a big call as well. The gravity of such an action.
Oh, this is huge. This is huge. And in fact, Jason's quite right. This is not a physical malady or Hansen's disease. In fact, the whole term leprosy getting in here is, once again, our friends the Septuagint did that with the Greek word lepra, and so somebody rendered the Jewish scriptures into Greek. We don't have, just so folks who may be confused by this, we don't have the original Septuagint of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, that the library in Alexandria burned down. That's gone. So this was stuck. The Greek word for leprosy, lepra, was put in there, and that's how this wound up in all the translations. There's no relationship, as Jason said. Leprosy or Hansen's disease is a bacterial disease that today they actually are. But anyways, it lasts years. Without proper. This has nothing to do with that. Number 2 is, you said, I, the priest, and the one who who makes sure to cleanse a person. Well, if you notice, the text is very clear here, and that is until the priest, and this is going to be so unbelievable, says you are unclean, the person's not unclean. All right, I'll give this away. This is brilliant, okay? Let me just show you something. This is so delicious that wherever you are, put it down. If you're standing, sit down and make sure that the chair has four, and listen carefully. First of all, as Jason said, this malady not only can go to a person, but also can go to your clothing, go to the threads that are even going to be used for clothing, could go to your house, go to anything. Now, what happens? The function of the priest is so critical here because, I'm going to do this even though it's advanced, but we'll do it because it'll give you a sense of how important the statement of the sages is, the statement of the judges, the statement of the priest. And that is, if let's say a priest gets a call, is told that, look, it looks like my house has leprosy, okay, has this thing breaking up. I'm going to using that word, but really the word saras. We'll talk about that word in a moment. Mm-hmm. So what does the priest do? The priest tells him, clear everything out of your house. Get it up before I show up. Get it up. Why? Because if I declare it unclean, then everything in the house is unclean. You got it? So let's stop and think about that for a moment. If this was a normal malady, if the in itself made it unclean, and the priest was just recognizing, identifying what was there already,
then it would already be unclean.
Right. So what is this? Some sort of game? Think about this. The man tells the priest is notified that I think I may have here. We have white blotches that are breaking out. I'm not going to go into the actually 4 different types of white blotches. Its colors not relevant, not germane to this. The key point is, I want you to listen to this. Most people miss this. The priest then says, get everything out of your house, because if I proclaim it to be unclean, if the stuff is in the house, it becomes unclean as well. Well, wait. That stuff was in the house when I contacted the priest. What kind of game? So now we see that the priest has to say it. This is a very important point. Until he proclaims it to be tamei, impure, meaning it's saras, and he says the person's the mitzvah, he is in the mitzvah. In fact, priests sometimes would hold back on visiting the person if, let's say, the person just gotten married or the person's just had a child or there's some sort of celebration or festival, so as not to render the person unclean. So the priest is critical here. Without him saying it, it isn't. The priest has to identify it. That's number one. Now we'll talk about saras. Saras is, we actually encounter someone with saras, one person with saras in Torah who actually gets. So we know what saras is a punishment for, and that is predominantly for a person who is speaking lashon hara, who's speaking something bad about somebody else.
So we're talking about Miriam, right?
Yes. Here we're going to Numbers 12. Here we have the only case it's not the only case of mitzvah in the Bible, but it is the only case we have in Torah. So therefore, we could see it there very clearly. A mitzvah, in fact, the word mitzvah is a compression of 2 words. It's motzi ra, which means someone, like motzi means to bring out or to extract, like hamotzi lechem and to brings forth. Motzi ra, someone who brings forth something that's bad, someone who says something that could be bad. Now there are 3 levels of this. Someone could say something that's bad that is true, but still cast that person in bad light. That's called lashon hara. A person could say something called rechilus. Rechilus means that a person could say something that can cause someone to dislike another person. It's forbidden. The worst form of bad speech is motzi shemra. This is the worst possible. Motzi shemra means that you're actually saying something that's not true about somebody that defames the person. The key point is this, that you see, listen, my holy brothers and sisters, this is really unbelievable what you're about to hear. This is a very strange punishment in Scripture. Why? It is really the only punishment, ongoing punishment, that's miraculous. That means God performs a miracle. That means if you look at other sins that the Jewish people might commit, So God says, so you won't get rain, your enemies will defeat you, whatever it is. You can be punished personally, all kinds of things. But still like lightning bolts fly out of heaven. So here we have in view, God literally performs a miracle in this case, because this thing clearly is not natural. The priest says it is. If it isn't, this is not natural. So why would God perform a miracle to punish someone or to criticize or to make someone better, to get them to repent, specifically for the sin of improper speech? This is very exquisite. That is that, why is it that this is a sin that so many people stumble in? That people say words, and unfortunately those words have enormous gravity. They cause a lot of pain, they hurt people's feelings, they destroy people's reputations, they can destroy a marriage. People think to themselves that, it's just a word. And what's a word? I say a word now, and the word, ends. It may bounce off two walls and then fly out the window, and then the sound and vibrations just recede and evaporate and disappear. Oh, no, you don't know. When you're saying a word, you're actually creating something. As it says in Psalm 35, with the word God created. So a word we see in Genesis all over the Torah, it's saying something. Even saying God's name in vain, this is fantastic. So people dismiss or stumble in the laws of speaking evil about someone or causing strife through speech, which Miriam did with her brother. And therefore God's saying, no, I'm going to show you that your speech is actually tangible. It's actually, you could feel it, you could touch it. It really creates something. I'm going to perform a miracle, and that is the blotches that the priest has to see, and then a sign say, okay, this person is impure. So Motzi Ra is someone who releases that which is evil, and then God steps in and performs a miracle in order to get Now, here's the other part. As I said a moment ago, we all know this, that when people speak evil about another or say things that create strife, what does it do to people? It isolates them. Mm-hmm. It causes families to break apart. How many of you listening to this show right now have not spoken to a friend, to a sister, to a brother, to you, because what someone said to you about that person, right? It causes a person to become evil speech causes people their lives to become destroyed, causes a person's marriage to be destroyed, it causes relationships to be destroyed, and it isolates people. And that's why it's mido keneged mido. What happens to the mitzvah? What happens to that person? How do they atone? But how do they make right? How are they punished in a sense? Punished here is in a sense of how are they dealt with so that they may repent, is they have to understand what they've done to the person. Evil speech causes people to become isolated, to lose family and friends and relationships. And therefore, you have to leave the camp of the Jewish people. And that's ultimately, once the priest declares someone is a mitzvah, that means you become isolated. What you did to someone else now happens to you. I just one more, if we have time, just one more thing. This is also, I'm really doing triage here because there's so much to speak about. There is another anomaly, and if you're new to listening to the show, welcome. And what we said is that always look for the oddities, the anomalies, just like a radiologist is looking at an MRI, an X-ray, and they're looking not for the normative lines, but looking for something unusual. Mm-hmm. So the purpose of sending someone out of the camp is that they, of course, everything is so that they can repent. They can feel what it's like to be isolated. They couldn't be in the camp at all. They couldn't be in any of the walled cities and so on. Mm. So it's interesting, but there's something so bizarre here. And it's a very famous law, and it's almost a refrain. And that is, what happens, the person had a blotch of white, but then it covered their entire body. Everything becomes white. That means it went from a patch to the whole body is now white. So you think, well, if one little patch, it really, all the size of the patch only had to be roughly about 3/4 of an inch square. I don't know what that is. The key point is this. There are some people who really are in so much trouble spiritually that really this won't work for them. That means that for many people, criticism is helpful, and punishment makes them behave better, makes them better people. But as we know, sometimes there's a child that is in so much trouble. Any of you who have been a teacher know this. Sometimes you encounter a young man, a young girl, they're just completely beside themselves. And they're just in their own world. And no matter what, they're thrown out of class 20 times, they just keep doing it. And that person needs a special kind of attention. Regular criticism doesn't lift them up, but can destroy them. And sometimes teachers, parents can make a mistake by treating all of their children the same. And that could be a disaster. Because yes, strong criticism can be beneficial and is beneficial for some kids, but for some kids, they can't handle it. It doesn't work for them. They need love. And I'll tell you this, I'll share this with you, that when I my life is devoted really, all of my adult life is devoted to helping Jews in the church return to the God of Israel. That's it. That's everything I do. And I never get upset when I meet Jews who are in the church or Christians at all. I know they're really in a bit of trouble, but I know that they got in trouble because they didn't have my background. How often I've been recorded, people say to me, Rabbi, I used to be Messianic, well, what should I do? And I tell them, I envy you. That means that people who get involved, who are so in the church, they're so far away from our people, they can't be talked to the way we normally say, hey, what are you doing? No, they need a lot of love. They need a special care. It's like a technique. Oh, I'm going to give love because it works better. No, it's because it really, these people just need a special kind of attention. And sending them out of the camp, simply saying to a Jew who's in the church, get out. Rather than say, come, let's study the Torah together. What is God's opinion? That's how I always approach it. And that's what works for them. It really, because they really want to connect to God. Whatever reason, they didn't grow up in the same world that I did. So therefore, we see this anomaly that some people, this kind of criticism that a person is declared unclean doesn't work for them. Who are they? The people who their whole body is white. It means it's all on. So that means they're declared pure. Because remember what I told you earlier, the priest is the one that says it. He makes it happen. So when the Cohen says, this guy, don't throw him out of the camp. And therefore, he's dealt with differently. And that's very important.
Okay, let me just try and get this straight, just with what you've said so far. Help me out here, Jason. So we cited earlier on in Numbers, of course, Miriam, who all of a sudden became totally covered white in leprosy and was sent out of the camp for a period of time. Here in chapter 13 and verse 13, I think it is. Yes, it is. It says, if indeed the leprosy has covered all his body, he shall pronounce him clean who has the sore. It has all turned white. He is clean. This is, okay, so I'm trying to, okay, Jason, what's going through your mind, mate?
It's written in my notes that if you had the white, there were different, I think what was happening is there was a ramping scale of how bad things were. So in my text I have, then the priest shall look, and behold, if the leprosy has covered all the flesh, he shall pronounce him clean. That it has the plague, it is all turned white, he is clean. And I think the white is good. It's the red and the blistering sores that's bad. And it's a little bit like chickenpox. So when you get chickenpox, if you've got the pox and all of the sores that you have, all the spots you have are big and they're all pussy and nasty. Have you had chickenpox?
No, I have, yeah.
Yeah, so you're contagious for a certain period and then you're non-contagious for a certain period. And I think this might be something similar, that your discoloration of skin is a milder form, so you're not gonna that's not gonna spread. But if you get the tumors, I think the tumors are called risings in the skin in the text. If you have the tumors, then that's a much worse thing. So, I mean, for me, I'm kind of dancing between the spiritual and the physical here. But if you have these much worse physical eruptions, that might be what causes you to be removed. But then I believe Miriam had the white skin, right?
She had the white skin. Okay, Tovia, just help us out. We're just go through it again. I'm just not.
Yeah.
I'm not clear on this yet.
So this is a very famous refrain in the Jewish world. Chis ha'tzoras is kol b'soroi, which literally means that the tzoras has in fact covered the entire skin. This is a term used in the Jewish world to describe a person. Let me give you an example. They say in Yiddish in the Altaheim in Europe, if a Jew married out of the faith, or a Jew converted to Christianity, happened. So the family would set shiva. Literally, the person's dead. That's how they would handle it. The person would be literally. In fact, there was a tradition that if a person's child converted to Christianity, they would sit shiva. That's the mourning period of like someone died, but they would do it for 14 days, twice as long, because it's a spiritual death. But no one does that today. I mean, that's not in our time. It's handled differently. Why? Because in the Altaheim meaning in the old home, meaning in Europe before World War II, were Jews like the story of Anna Tevka, the story of Fiddler on the Roof. He had three daughters. You remember? So the film is very special to me on many levels. One of them is you have three daughters, and each of them defied tradition, but on different levels. The first one, all she did was she just chose the boy she wanted to marry, right?
They chose each other. Yeah.
So, ultimately, you remember that? So Tevye said, he first, what do you mean? You're supposed to marry Laser Wolf. It's arranged. He's rich. He may be old man, but he's a rich man. He can give me 500 chickens. But ultimately, he concocts a story for his wife Chava, so that the grandmother came in a dream, could kill. Anyway, so Tevye said, you know what? That's just it. I can live with that.
I can live with that.
I can live with that. And then the middle daughter, I don't remember what she did. But Tevye goes, he's in the field. He goes, all right, I can deal with this too. Oh, she runs off to be with a Jewish boy, but he became a communist, and she was going to Siberia.
Well, they didn't ask for his permission. Right. They just asked for his blessing. They said, we are going to get married.
We're getting married, and just we're not asking. Give us your blessing, right? But that I can live with. Well, what does the youngest daughter do? She gets baptized and converts to Christianity and marries presumably a Russian Orthodox boy. And he says, no, this can't be. And then he says, and he walks away, and she, I don't want to break apart on this one. This of course went on. Even though Anatevka is a fictitious place, it really is a very real place. That was the Pale Settlement. That was how Jews lived in these little communities, and they lived on a knife's edge, where they ultimately had to leave. But the youngest daughter, you cross that line. That line can never be crossed. You see, so in Europe, in the Pale Settlement, which is the western part of the Russian Empire, where maybe nearly 2 million Jews lived at one time during Tsarist and Christian Russia. So at that time, there was a great expectation of how people would live. So at that time, people would, they would have a blotch. You deal with it. How? But if people sin, they really were dealt with very harshly. We're not Anatevka anymore. We're in America now. We're in Western Europe now. I'm here in Indonesia now. The Jews here in Jakarta, in Papua, have been already detached from Torah, from the Jewish ancestors, for quite a number of generations. Some 3, some 6 and 7, depending on what island they're on. So when I see them and I speak to them, I understand they've been far away. I don't treat them the way Tevye treated his youngest daughter, who got baptized within that rubric. In the same way, when you see someone who's they just need a whole different approach completely. Being excommunicated from the camp will not work for that person. This person needs special attention because and that's what I'm seeking to convey. This is a very famous refrain, which means you're talking about a child. Usually that's or a person requires special attention. They're an exception to the rule. They're in so much trouble that they actually, what ordinarily might work to bring healthy flesh, to bring purity in, that won't work for this kid. And if you do it, you'll destroy the kid. If you throw that kid out of class, that kid won't work. If you throw them out of the camp, this child is not thrown out of the camp. This person is dealt with differently. And that's what comes into view here. It's really very powerful. The whole issue of God intervening, because we really don't take to heart what a bad word says. When someone says something bad about you, how much it isolates, how much destruction it does. God say, I'm going to show you. And in fact, we see this coming into view through in the story of Miriam, where Miriam received the tsaras, and it's like a dead person. In fact, if you look at Numbers 12:12, it says there, behold, that Miriam literally became like a dead person, like a corpse. It's very interesting. It's also interesting. I don't know how much time we have. I don't want to overdo it here, but it's very interesting that the word nega tsaras, this term of a malady, is really an unusual term in the 5 books of Moses. This word nega, a very simple word, appears in another place where the way to deal with it, we're going to get into this later, is actually with the blood on the wood. And that is, we see that same word is used as a plague for the Egyptians, the 10th plague. And we make we're going to deal with that later on. This is huge. But the key point is everyone needs a different kind of attention, has to be addressed differently. And that's where Ezekiel 34 is. And then God is the good shepherd, the great shepherd, who tends to each sheep needs a different kind of attention, needs young grass, older grass. Everybody is addressed differently here. But also the priest is the one literally, that means God is working through him, but God made it that the priest is in partnership with God. And the priest, when he says it, only then is the person impure. Before he says it, not impure.
Okay. Jason?
Yeah, a couple of things. So while Tovia was speaking there, although I was listening intently, I was also looking at some other things to do with Miriam and to do with this skin disease very quickly. So while we did read that in verse 13, then the priest shall look and behold, if the leprosy covers all the flesh, you're pronounced clean. The very next line says, but whosoever raw flesh appears on him, he should be unclean. So it does appear that the raw part is bad. If you are completely covered in the white, that's good. That seems to be the end, and that's the way out. Now, the Numbers chapter with Miriam is quite interesting because the cloud lifts and Miriam is there, and it says that her skin was leprous. Now, it didn't say she was completely leprous, and in the verse that we've just read, it says that your body's completely white, and that's clean. This just says her skin was leprous. It doesn't say all of her. So if it's not all of her, then she's discounted from that straight away. But it also says that the real issue here isn't so much her illness. Her illness didn't make her go outside the camp for 7 days. It was the way she acted. Because it says the Lord replied to Moses, if her father had spat in her face, would she not be in disgrace for 7 days? So this is more of a picture of what she's done, and that's kind of her punishment.
That's the point. The point is what triggers tsaras. We really need to use that word because leprosy just get everything confused. That means what is clear is what triggers tsaras is bad behavior. Not any kind of bad behavior, but bad behavior of speech, or we'll see of great pride, which is related to it. That means the other person's not really important. But the key is bad behavior triggers this miraculous intervention of tsaras, which causes the person to do, and that is create isolation. So that is consistent with what you see in Numbers chapter 12.
Okay.
Jason?
It's interesting that Tovia spoke about a person being considered dead, because there's interesting for two reasons. First of all, if a person is spiritually unclean, if their impurity is such that they have to be removed from the holy things of Israel, that really struck a chord with me, because Israel is supposed to be a nation of priests, and obviously within a nation of priests you can't have an impure priest. So it's interesting that person is then removed from this group of people until they're okay to come back and resume their role in this nation. The second thing is when we get through to verse 45, I think it is. In mine it's 45. It speaks about rending the garment and covering the face. But rending the garment, as we know, is something that people do when someone dies. But in this instance, the person does it to themselves. So they consider themselves in mourning for themselves, which reflects what Tovia says quite nicely.
Yeah. And let's I can weave this in. Near Torah, there's no end. This actually happens. This is a very strange event in history, but in fact, one of the greatest kings of the Jewish people, and his name was Uzziyahu, he ruled for 52 years. At the time, that was the longest any Davidic king had ruled. His name alternately is called Tazria, and you could read about this in 2 Chronicles chapter 26. What happens is that he is filled with pride, and he acts improperly, and he becomes a Metzora, which is... And what happens in his life is he really was a great king. He was so successful. He rebuilt Jerusalem. He liberated a lot. Those of you who go historically a lot, you could thank him. He just accomplished so much. But then his heart became filled with pride and so on. We're not going to go into that part. But the key is that he is going to become Metzora, and he spends the last 12 years of his life, because the people loved him so much they didn't want him to retire. So they build him like a house in the cemetery, and that's where he lives, and that's where he rules from. They said he actually rules as a Metzora, and that's how he spends the last segment of his life. And then he has a fantastic son whose name is Yotam, and then Achaz, and then Hezekiah. So in fact, and therefore, when you see in Isaiah chapter 6, notice it's a famous holy, 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 the angels and so on. That's really the first chapter of Isaiah, even though it's chapter 6. It really should be first. On another show, we'll talk about why it isn't. But the key point is that's when Isaiah is commissioned to become a prophet. If you notice there, it says at the death of Uzziyahu. That's how the whole chapter begins. It doesn't really mean that he died there. It obviously can't mean he died there because Isaiah was a prophet during his lifetime. The death there is referring to him becoming a Metzora. And we see, and how do I know that? How can I be sure of that? People are wondering. So if you go at the end of Chronicles 26, you'll see this is music, man. This is music. This is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, first movement. You see, at the end of Chronicles 26, it says there, if you want to know more about this event, about this story, you will see it in the prophecy of Isaiah. Look it up in Isaiah. This almost, if you're familiar with the Jewish scriptures, this almost never happens. Daniel doesn't say, if you want to know more about it, go look it up in Zechariah. I mean, that is so unusual. They're so rare. Prophets don't often mention other prophets. They do. But to say, look it up in the prophecy of this one, that would be like, that should be like one of these tests, like, could you name whatever? If you couldn't figure that one out, this is one of the exceptions. So we see there that Chronicles is telling us that you can find it in Isaiah. But where is it in Isaiah about it? Well, there it is, chapter 6. So in fact, the death, the white blotches, and again, when someone dies, God forbid, so what happens? The blood leaves their skin and they in fact become pale. That's in fact, so a Metzora is in fact a kind of spiritual death. And remember what we said a moment ago, that they're dealt with really in the way that a dead person would be. The level of what has to happen in order they have to be outside of the camp. Anything they come into contact with becomes unclean. It's called an Avi Avos HaTumah, the grandfather of Tumah. It's like the great impurity. Well, what does it all have in common? Bingo, death. So a Metzora, someone who's a Metzora, is like someone who died. It's absolutely, this weaves, what Jason was explaining is so enormous. I hope the listeners all grasp it. It's really so fantastic. It fits together throughout Scripture in a magnificent fashion.
Well, I didn't see any of this coming, I have to admit. Jason, I have a question, and I think you will probably know the answer. What is a warp and what is a woof?
Oh, a warp is a woven fabric, and a woof is a knitted one.
So I knew you'd know that.
Why? Why? Is he a knitter? What is he? He's a knitter?
No, Jason, whenever I have a question about something...
No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. I love you guys.
He's a dictionary of trivia. He absolutely is, aren't you?
I have a head that is full of information that will never earn me a living, but it makes it. Well, one thing I love about the
Hence
Torah
the
portion
broken smoke
is...
detector for 6 years. Go ahead.
I knew there wouldn't be a
Just call
fire.
the stupid electrician today. He replaced the squeaky box. All right, go ahead. Because it's Warped
one
Wolf. He's been paying attention to. Go ahead.
I love about the Torah portion is it's not biased towards bald people. There's a great passage in this where it says that if your hair is falling out, that's a sign of this skin condition. But if you have a bald head, you should be considered clean until you've been proven otherwise. And I think that's quite sweet that there were bald people going, oh no, it says that if you lose your hair, you've got this thing. People are going to think I've got it. But it says no, you absolutely have to be considered clean unless proven otherwise. So if you've got bald hair out there, don't feel bad. It's going to be okay.
I'll stop worrying. Thanks.
And that's that's really because we're coming to a close now on this portion, but that's really how the whole portion ends. Look at like the last verse. You see that the idea of everything in this whole chapter, this parsha, is all about Torah, is all about becoming better, about instruction. So if you look at the last verse, the whole last verse of Parshas Tazria is what? Zois Toras Nega Tzoras. And there's that word nega. That means this is the teachings. That means the purpose of all of this is all about Torah, about instruction. Because these are the great chukim. It means those laws that are hard, that we don't really apprehend it's how it works. Because it's not like don't steal, that we get. But here the key is Zois Toras Nega Tzoras. This is a very unusual language in Scripture. This is the Torah. That means this is the reproof. This is of course, I don't even know how the English translation render it. That's fine. But this is the teachings. This is the Torah of Nega Tzoras. So that means the purpose of all this is to make you better, to raise you up, to make you pure. So you should watch what you say. Watch what comes out of your mouth. You think it's just a word. You think you're just saying, it's only a word. I said I take it. I just said something. Oh, no. And that's why, it's just like in Isaiah and all the prophets. What are they concentrating on? Not eating pork? No. They concentrate on where people stumble. And where do people stumble? Predominantly, the prophets is all about how to teach that you're not treating people properly. That means your social justice is dead. You're doing great on eating kosher. You're doing great on keeping Shabbos and new moon. Great. Read Isaiah 1. You're blowing it on social justice, and that's why you were in so much trouble. So what do we find there? Once again, people think, sure, I could do the ritual, meaning I could be an Orthodox Jew, meaning keep Shabbos and so on, but my life could be vacuous in the way I treat somebody else. And that kind of thinking, that just the ritual, then God's going to step in and he's going to give you tzaras if you think you can destroy someone's life with words. Then God will step in and destroy a temple over that kind of behavior. That's the key of the whole thing. You want to know, people like ritual, but don't you dare the ritual is beautiful. Giving your wife flowers and chocolates and writing a card is important, but not if you're sleeping with another woman. Then what's the point of it? It has to be filled with the personal relationship with God, that you should always think about Hashem and be connected to God as you keep your ritual. Else the ritual is meaningless.
Well, I never thought that I would say that was both a delicious and juicy Torah portion. I didn't see that coming. Not only that, Jason, but next week, Metzorah, we've got more leprosy, and I think I'm almost looking forward to it now.
Yay!
You may be the first person in history who said, I'm looking forward to more leprosy. No, seriously, it's possible that no one has ever crafted a sentence in human history. I'm looking forward to more leprosy. You, Jono, may be I'm not saying, but this may be new territory here. I don't know if that sense had ever been crafted before this moment. So congratulations. On behalf of Shakespeare and Pushkin, I'd like to just thank you.
Thank you. So I'm looking forward to your wisdom, my friend, on the coming Torah portion as well. But that's Tazria. How about that? Well, I thought it was going to be a quick one, but I didn't expect all of that detail, and I'm glad that you went to the trouble. So thank you, Rabbi Tovia Singer. OutreachJudaism.org is the website, OutreachJudaism.org, where you can get a copy of Why Doesn't Judaism Accept the Christian Messiah, Volumes 1 and 2. That's not all that's there, by the way. There's a few things that you can pick up there, plus a whole lot of free resources as well. So thank you again for coming back on the program. Jason of Spiritualbabies.net. Any parting thoughts?
Yeah, I think we should probably mention that the three of us will be joining Ross Nichols in Israel in about, 6 months now?
It's not very long at all. It's not far away. It's going to be, November. The 2nd of November is when it kicks off this year. So there's still some seats left on the bus, people. So don't take too long to leave your deposits. Go to truthtoyou.org. Actually, there's a link on this post you can click on, and it will take you to the necessary information. If you would like to join us in the land, and Ross, g'day Ross, this coming November, we would love to have you with us. It's going to be an incredible tour from north to south, and some very, very special time in Jerusalem. It's just going to be a wonderful thing. I can't wait. We'd love to have you with us, and you can certainly join us. There is space on the bus. Don't take too long to secure your place with a deposit. There we go.
Nice one.
All right, we're off.
We did.
Until next time, dear listeners, be blessed and be set apart by the truth of our Father's word. Shalom.